Think beyond traditional business banking. Think a partner that gives you in-depth financial insights.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Power Table, coming to you from Cairo in Egypt. We're on the grounds of the Intra-Africa Trade Fair here in Cairo, where quite a lot has been said and done in terms of moving that needle for trade on the continent. We have quite an interesting panel lined up to discuss this very interesting topic of moving trade forward on the continent. And my guests so far are Prudence Sebahizi, the Director for Institutional Matters and Program Coordination at the AfCFTA Secretariat. We also have the person of Mansur, Ahmed, is the Chairman of the Pan-African Manufacturers Association. And still on this panel, we have Patient Taiba Tambwe, is the Executive Chairman of Africa Desk. And last but not the least, we have Charles Odii, is the Director General of the Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria. Quite an interesting panel we have lined up, and let me put it to my panel as we look at the issues affecting trade on the continent and how we can advance trade in Africa. I'd like to start from Prudence to understand in terms of where we are right now in terms of the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Thank you very much. As you know, the AfCFTA agreement has been signed in 2018 and ratified, and from January 2021 we officially started trading within the AfCFTA market. As we speak, we have 47 countries that have ratified the agreement. When we talk about having ratified the agreement, it means that they are ready to implement at national level. They have taken the agreement through the national processes to the parliaments, and they are ready to implement. We have tested the practical trade happening last year when we launched the first guided trade initiative in October. We were able to see countries that were ready to ship their goods. At the time of the launch, we had 7 countries, and today, after having done assessment after 1 year, we have about 31 countries that are facilitating trade within the AfCFTA market. And this means they have started reducing tariff on a number of products according to the commitment which they have made within the AfCFTA. We also have other trade facilitation instrument because, you know, whenever you make any trade transaction, there is a financial transaction that follows. That's why you hear the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, which is an initiative. It's an infrastructure, a platform that has been established by the Afrexim Bank jointly with the AfCFTA Secretariat to make sure that when you do trade in AfCFTA, payments can be done in a local currency for both the one who is paying and the one who is receiving the payment. And the settlement can be done instantly. This will save us about $5 billion every year that were spent on the cost of transfers when we use the international transfer systems.
There's been quite a lot of work being done there in terms of the AfCFTA implementation, and it has quite a lot of moving parts which Prudence has just put into perspective for us here. But let's speak to another key stakeholder in all of this, the manufacturers. You know, because we cannot talk about trade without industrialization. We can't talk about trade without the people who are doing the work, getting the African products manufactured, put together and sent into the shores. And I'd like to speak to the person of Mr. Mansur Ahmed, is the chairman of the Pan-African Manufacturers Association. And in terms of the implementation of the AfCFTA so far, I'd like to get to know what some of the pain points are for manufacturers and what you would like to see better to bring better outcomes in terms of the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you very much. I think, first of all, we need to congratulate the AfCFTA and other institutions involved in the development of this process. A lot of work has been done, and indeed a lot of decisions, a lot of arrangements have been put in place to facilitate trade within Africa and in fact improve trade with Africa. Because I think there are two sides of the trade that we need to look at. One is intra-African trade, trade between African countries. The other is Africa's trade with other regions of the world. Now, we must recognize that improving trade within Africa, intra-African trade, does not necessarily mean reducing trade between Africa and other regions, but it means transforming the trade that takes place within Africa and with other regions. With regards to intra-African trade, I think, yes, we have made some progress, but let's be honest, there's a long way to go. First of all, the trade in the global trade is largely now in manufactured goods. And at least 70% or more of global trade is in manufactured goods. And trade in manufactured goods is responsible for probably 30% of global jobs. Now, in Africa, the situation, as we all know, is different. Probably less than 45% of Africa's trade is in manufactured goods. So we have a long way to go. It means that more than 55% of our, inwards trade is coming from outside, especially manufactured goods. So the first pain point is we must significantly scale up the level of manufacturing in order to be able to scale up our trading within Africa. The second is that the 55% of goods, manufactured goods that are coming from outside, represent a huge percentage of our value addition. And therefore, by improving manufacturing, we are also going to reduce the amount of manufactured goods trade coming from outside. So we have these two urgent needs. And that's why for us in manufacturing sector, yes, a lot has been done, significant progress has been made, but the way to El Dorado is still long. And I think we must continue to work together. And I think this is not just I believe the public sector has done very well so far. AfCFTA, Afro-Exim Bank, and of course AUC. But the private sector itself needs to do more. We must engage each other. We must build the linkages in the value chains that will improve our capacity to produce. And we must build the infrastructure to not only to trade, which I think has been talked about, but also to scale up manufacturing. Issues like quality infrastructure. There's hardly sufficient quality infrastructure in Africa to be able to allow us to produce the manufactured goods that are acceptable in today's global trade markets. So this is another area. Of course, as has been said, trading has the current, and indeed in the past, has been bogged down by regulatory impediments, especially arising from different regulatory regimes within the continent. And of course, that's what AfCFTA has been set to do and has been doing reasonably well. But I think this has to be, we have to move the pace a bit, because frankly, I think despite the effort that has been made to start this trading, the major hurdle is those, those regulatory bottlenecks that has to be removed. And that, I think, is a major area that we have to continue to work together. Thank you.
Of what we're doing there, and some of the pain points you mentioned are very critical. But let me bring in another critical stakeholder here, at least first to advance the work that they are doing on the continent to advance trade, and also help us even better understand the scope of African desk, because I'm sure some of my viewers will really love to understand the work that you're doing and why the partnerships that you're trying to foster are important. So let me bring in Faraja Ongabati here, the director of African Desk, to speak.
As my predecessor, I want first of all to congratulate the AfCFTA Secretariat for the job done. I think they are delivering very well to be sure that the process of full implementation of AfCFTA agreement is ongoing. On our side, as African Desk, first of all, I have to recall that we are a consulting firm, but our aim objective is to help all the institutions involved in AfCFTA agreement implementation to be sure that we are looking at the same direction. Because we have the tools, we have the protocols, we have the agreement. But the question, my brother, how many people know about that? Not many. So the role of African Desk is, among others, to ensure that we are populating and making the good awareness of the benefits of this AfCFTA agreement. That's why we are working closely with AfCFTA Secretariat. They can't be everywhere. You know, it's a secretariat set up by AU. They are working very hard across all Africa, but they can't be everywhere. Being aside or being next or close to business people, we thought that it's very important that we help them with studies, raising matters like, for example, cross-border issues. There are many issues in cross-border. Trade facilitation. We know that one of the challenges of Africa is lack of trade facilitation. I think we have, my predecessor has talked about industrialization. But even if we have a lot of industry in Africa, but if we are not able, or it's difficult for us to move the cargo easily from Nigeria, for example, to Benin, if Nigeria can't sell its cement in Benin, which is just close, Benin is obliged to import from China, we still have challenges. So, as African Desk, we are advising. We make studies, we make benchmark, we make comparison with other regions of the world, and we try to assist with our advising, with our advice, the governments and other institutions which are involved in the implementation of AfCFTA, so that we are sure that, as my predecessor said, the journey, of course, is long, but still we are moving.
Yeah, because no doubt trade facilitation is very key if we're definitely going to move the needle for trade on the continent. And let me bring in someone also very interesting here in the work that he's doing in terms of working with small and medium enterprises in Nigeria to advance the work of trade, and in person of Charles Odii. Charles, yes, you're newly appointed, but it's quite a tall order for you in terms of what the work ahead. And I'd like to speak to, in terms of the mandate that you've been given, how you're looking to drive that segment of business to advance trade in Nigeria.
What we are focused on right now is helping to democratize access to finance for all the small businesses in Nigeria. And then one of the issues that we have been faced and confronted with is the small business census. There are a couple of small businesses in Nigeria, over 40 million of them, but what we do not know is the data, where these businesses exist, what they're doing, and what challenges they're confronted with. But we've begun to have town hall meetings, we've begun to have engagement with these small businesses, and with our engagement, three things are prevalent, and I think that we can start to address. The first is access to finance. Finance is very expensive and finance is very scarce for small businesses in Nigeria. How do we start to make this finance available for these small businesses, and how do we start to make this finance readily accessible? So it's not just to be available but also accessible. I'll give you an instance. Small businesses in Nigeria, many of them were in manufacturing and other sectors, hear about a lot of government intervention, hear about what AfCFTA is doing and other government regulation, but they can access it. Some others do not even hear about it. So the next thing is access to information. You know, they said after you've done an amazing thing, the next best thing is to tell the world how you did that thing. Information is scarce. A lot of small businesses do not even know that this is actually going on right here in Cairo. And so if they do not know what's going on, how then can they take advantage of what's going on? So democratizing that information, making sure that, you know, we go into the inner cities of Africa to let them know that this agreement has been signed by a couple of countries, but then this is how you can take advantage of this information. So after we solve the problem with finance and we solve the problem with information, then the next problem is standardization and regulation. Small businesses in Nigeria have to package their goods in a certain way to appeal to small businesses or to appeal to their market in Ghana or in Kenya. That whole process of regulation, that whole process of standardization is another thing that we need to start to look at actively.
Very interesting points put there by Charles. Also, Mr. Mansur Ahmed also highlighted some very key points, and which I would like Prudence to respond to, because in terms of the work that you're doing, I can imagine that the Secretariat has thought about a lot of these challenges and have already put measures in place to address them.
Yes, when you have a trade agreement concluded, the biggest now challenge is to have it implemented. And the AfCFTA agreement is very complex. It has about 8 protocols that accompany the agreement. We have protocol on trade in goods, the protocol on trade in services, the protocol on investment, intellectual property rights, competition policy, women and youth in trade, and digital trade. And all those protocols, they form a full package that is covered by AfCFTA agreement, and we have a dispute settlement mechanism that will make sure that any dispute that arises during the implementation can be resolved by Africans instead of going to the WTO. So now, what we have to make sure that it is implemented at country level, you start by engaging stakeholders. Stakeholders engagement is very important. Before you even reach the awareness of the general public, you have to make sure that the people who are directly involved in business, the private sector, they understand all those legal instruments, they understand what their rights are. You have to make sure the government institutions, not only the ministries that negotiate, but all government institutions understand what commitments have been made in those agreements. So once you have sensitized the stakeholders, once you have mobilized the resources for those stakeholders to be engaged, then you have to reach out to the people who are supposed to do business. So I'm lucky to hear that now small and medium enterprises are on board, because we have a protocol on women and youth in trade, which targets mainly issues that small and medium enterprises face when they do cross-border business. We're planning to have what we call a simplified trade regime, where you can allow a certain threshold of imports or exports across the border to happen for SMEs without applying import or any other tariff or taxes, to allow the small and medium enterprises to test the water, to test the market. There is another important aspect that they have mentioned, access to finance. We are working with Afrexim Bank. You could have heard of AfCFTA Adjustment Fund. We have now set up an adjustment fund which not only looks at how to address issues of fiscal challenges that countries will face when they liberalize trade, but also looks at opportunities for investment where businesses can borrow money to invest in sectors where we think production has to happen. Now coming to industrialization, there is no way you can trade if you don't produce. Currently, intra-African trade is less than 20% because we do not produce what we consume. So what we have done at AfCFTA is to identify the key priority sectors where we have to urge private sector to focus their effort to produce for the market, and one low-hanging fruit is agriculture. Agriculture and agro-processing. Currently we are importing about 8 billion worth of food from outside Africa, yet if we tap into the potential of the continent, Africa is able to feed the rest of the world. So there is a lot of opportunity if we invest in agro-processing and agribusiness. There is a lot of opportunities if we invest in transport and logistics. And here I commend Africa Desk because they are doing a lot of work in that area. If you look at the shipping companies we have in Africa, most of them, they're owned by outsiders. So we do not have African shipping companies that can facilitate transport of goods in Africa. The issues of airline connectivity, those are some of the challenges that we have to address if we want to make sure that trade happens in Africa.
I can see that time is fast spent here already, and we're just starting the conversation. But in terms of final word, let me allow my panelists here give their comments or recommendations in terms of how we can foster trade going forward. And let me start with Engineer Mansur.
Well, thank you very much. I think the gentleman just touched on an issue which is very critical to trade, particularly for both small and medium enterprises, but also for large enterprises. And that is the issue of movement of goods and people. And this is one of the protocols that AfCFTA has already put in place. But the process of bringing that on board is taking too long. I believe, perhaps it's only about 2 weeks ago, that Rwanda opened up to this issue and allowed all Africans to come to Rwanda without asking for a visa from their country. This is very critical. Now, this IATF itself, I can assure you that probably more than 20% of the people, of the businesses that want to come, could not come simply for the reason that they couldn't get a visa from their country. And I think this is wrong. And we have ridiculous situations where somebody has a UK visa and they can come into Egypt or into Kenya easily without a visa, whereas his Nigerian counterpart can do so. There is a story that I think maybe has not really gone viral yet, where a very big, very influential, very impactful businessman came with 3 or 4 partners from the US. And he's the leading chap to a country. I'm not going to mention the country. When they came, of course, all of the 3 partners handed in their passport and they went through. And the immigration took nearly 20 minutes looking at his own passport to determine whether he has a visa or not. Now, that is wrong. So I think this issue of movement of people and goods across must be one area that, and it's, in my view, a low-hanging fruit, because the more you allow people to move, the more they are going to trade. And I believe that that is one of the pain points, particularly for businesses generally, not just manufacturers. On the other hand, on the manufacturing side, I think there's a lot of work that has to be done on ensuring quality standards are being met. Because whether you're trading internally, intra-African, or externally with others, the issue of being able to meet quality standards is critical. And yet, in Africa, in most of the countries in Africa, we don't even have the requisite infrastructure for ensuring qualities, particularly for small and medium business enterprises. If you are a small producer, the cost of meeting quality requirements simply makes it impossible for you to export. So one of the things that I think institutions like Smedan ought to be doing is creating opportunities for small and medium enterprises to be able to meet quality standards very cheaply, maybe by aggregation and by supporting private establishment that can provide services in terms of reaching quality standards. So there are many other areas in this, but I think we must also recognize that these things require continuing advocacy at both national level, at subnational level, as well as at the regional and continental level. And this is why institutions like mine, like the Pan-African Manufacturers Association, come into play, that we can aggregate the views of manufacturers across the continent, identify key issues that need to be addressed by governments at various levels, particularly by AfCFTA Secretariat and other institutions such as the AUC, and then sit with them to work out how best can these challenges be removed. And once that is done, we also need to go back to our members and let them know what they need to do to be able to to take advantage of these new regulations. So I think, this AfCFTA and IATF is a moving train, and all of us need to be on it. And not only all of us need to be on it, we ought to be working with each other. I should expect to see in AfCFTA Secretariat a desk for private sector organizations that are involved at this level in various activities, whether it's in pursuit of infrastructure development or in pursuit of movement across nations and so on and so forth.
Right.
And I think we'll engage on that.
Time is fast spent right now because I
Thank you.
need to get the last 2 gentlemen put in their word. You mentioned a key word, which is advocacy, and I'd like to get Mr. Saiba Tambwe, the Executive Chairman of African Desk, to just speak to that work and also give your final comments as well. And Charles, also prepare.
I think my predecessor got the point by talking about advocacy. And the director from AfCFTA Secretariat said that in the awareness process and the process of to populate the agreement and advantage of AfCFTA, it's very important that we be sure that all the key players are aware. Not only the ministers, but even all the officials in all the levels, but mostly, and that is very important, the business community itself. You know, information is the key. Is the key point to do business. If you don't have information, if you don't have reliable information, that it will be very, very difficult for you to trade across Africa. You might think that it's easy for you to export your coffee maybe in London, in USA, yet you can export it in South Africa or in another country of Africa. So talking about advocacy, yes, the Pan-African Association of
Manufacturers.
Manufacturers, they can do advocacy for themselves. That is easy. If you are fighting for your own house, what is special? But look, African Desk is a neutral institution, but which is working with both private and public sector, can easily do the advocacy, showing the interest of really implementing this AfCFTA agreement and to populate it to all the stakeholders, the key stakeholders. So the advocacy process is very crucial, and I really commit or I really call upon AfCFTA Secretariat to continue doing the effort that they are doing currently for that.
All right, thank you so much, Tambwe. Let me get Charles to put in his final word and then...
Yes, I think my final word would be one word: access. Let us try to democratize access. Access to markets, access to finance, access to knowledge and information, and basically access to the trade regulations. And in concluding that, just peddling on what the chairman had said, a couple of my small businesses are here to exhibit. Well, many of them couldn't make it, but their goods made it here. So, you know, it's discombobulating that that kind of access still exists in this kind of environment. Thank you so much.
All right, and thank you so much, gentlemen. Very interesting findings coming out from this conversation here. Definitely, trade is about goods and people need to move across Africa if we're really going to move that needle for trade and get the outcomes that we so desire, especially as we look at the Africa that we want in going to 2063. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time on the show today. I've had the presence of Prudence of Sebahizi, the Director for Institutional Matters and Program Coordination at the AfCFTA Secretariat. We've also had Charles Odii, the Director General and CEO for the Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria, and also the President of Mansur, Ahmed, is the Chairman of the Pan-African Manufacturers Association. And finally, last but not least, Patient Saiba Tambwe is the Executive Chairman for the African Desk, talking about how to move trade on the continent. And that brings us to the end of Power Table today on CNBC Africa. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Kenneth Igbomo. Enjoy the rest of the day.
This program is in partnership with NetBank Commercial Banking, a banking partner that thinks bigger to guide your business growth.